Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain. Well, today we are the last day, I'd say, of nice nighttime temperatures. We are going to freeze tonight, and so we came in the tunnel down here to kind of wrap some things up for the season. And one of the things that we were wrapping up here is we planted really late pumpkins and squash, winter squash. We planted them in the tunnel in July, and we wanted to see, what kind of yield could we get and how wet plants, were fast enough, and just to see what kind of yields you get relative to, say, what you normally would get in the field. Now, we didn't plant a control group, but we kind of know from our own prior experiences when a harvest is pretty good, or, based on the number of plants we put in and the space we allotted, and whether a harvest is not so good. So let's just take a walk through and take a look at the bed. We knocked the plants down and we pulled out all of the squash and the pumpkins to the side, and we can kind of, do a walk through the various varieties and see which one performed well in the tunnel. Well, this first group here is a pumpkin that's called Cinnamon Girl, and it's a small pumpkin. It's kind of a pie pumpkin, and these are supposed to be orange, although we got a fairly good yield. Each of the varieties we put in 2 6-packs of plants. And so what we're talking about is 12 plants, and this was the yield of Cinnamon Girl off of 12 plants. And again, we started the actual plants themselves on the 19th of June, and they were transplanted into the tunnel here right around the 5th of July. So they were in the tunnel. Today is October 26th, I'm guessing. Can't look at my calendar. I lose track of time sometimes. But so when we pulled it out, this is what we got. And there's a few that are actually turned orange. There's a number of them that have orange around the base of the stem. They might turn, some of them like this one, that has a fair amount of orange in it. So given an environment that's kind of warm, say about 70 to 80 degrees, they might actually ripen up. But honestly, the vast majority of these green ones will probably never get ripe. So I'd have to say that this variety needed at least another month. Now this variety right here is called Baby Bear. It did better in terms of ripening up. The yield was not so great relative to the plants that we had in, but we did definitely get more orange pumpkins out of it. So I think, again, we can take the ones that are showing good color, and we'll, let the rest of them, these guys, kind of harden up and ripen up. And they're probably not going to be as sweet as we would normally get with a field ripening, but we got more out of this than we definitely got out of the Cinnamon Girl. This Baby Bear one is a fine. The meat of it isn't stringy. It actually is pretty sweet in normal circumstances, and it looks like the ones that did turn orange definitely sized up to the right size. But the green ones were definitely, way too small. Okay, so winter squash was a different story unto itself. This is all we got out of the butternut. Now, these are supposed to be baby butternuts, so I think they're called Butterscotch is the variety. And they just did not produce. So with the number of plants, we had 12 plants in here, and that's all the squash we got out of it. They did mostly ripen up, but we had a lot of blossoms that never set any fruit. And we also had a variety in winter squash called Long Island Cheese, and that didn't bear anything at all. So we were pretty disappointed in that variety. Now, the next variety, this is a Delicata variety, and that's all we got out of 12 plants. That is pretty bad. I'd say this one racked up to be the worst in terms of productivity. These are miniature size Delicatas, so they're not as big as you would see normally. And honestly, I think they just needed a lot more time. Okay, this variety is an Acorn. Our last two varieties were Acorns. And they did produce a number of squash better, but there was the acorns were more of a bush type, and they did set more fruit, relative to the number of plants we had. But this variety called Tuffy, which isn't as pronounced in terms of the ribbing on the acorn, most of them did ripen up. We had a few very, very small ones, and the undersize, number, again, I think it's related to the amount of time in the tunnel, but they set pretty good fruit. The last variety, which I think did the best in terms of right-sized fruit and ripening up well, and this was a definite bush type. It's called Autumn Acorn, and they are a good size. So when you look at these guys, they actually have really good size, and they ripened up better. So the bottom line, I guess, on most of these guys is the productivity was not anywhere near what we would normally see on growing squash, like out in the field. And I think it could be that it was just too late. I mean, putting things in July 5th, they probably would have done much better if I could have got them in a month earlier, and I think we would have got much, much more productivity. But I think, from the acorn squash size, these guys are pretty good. That's a pretty good size. So that one worked out pretty well. So the last thing we're going to do, and this is for a bit of overwintering here, is we took the refuse from the squash plants and we chopped and dropped them. Now I'm going to treat this with some JMS and then tarp it up. I may also put just a little bit of rotted, 2-year-old rotted hay on top and wet it down and really try to get this stuff to just kind of decompose into the garden itself. And then for next spring, hopefully what we're talking about is like in January, I can start planting some things in here like radishes and Hackerite turnips and things of that nature to get me to the next step for next year's crops. So I'm not sure that I would plant squash on the same bed again, but I definitely am not going to put onions on the same bed. I'm going to have to rotate those guys out. I got a lot of work to do on my rotations. So the conclusion I reached on this is kind of mixed. I think if I were to raise squash in the tunnel, again, I would go with all bush types and not have the traditional spreading type pumpkins and squash, and focus in on keeping things a bit tighter, maybe using less plants, giving them a little more space because they were pretty packed in. I planted about a 60-foot row, but when I look at it, and I've got 4, 5, 6 varieties so I had pretty much a full tray of squash, almost 72 plants, to put in an area on a row that was 60 foot long and 4 foot wide. They really filled out a lot, and maybe, that was part of the reason why, like the Delicatas and the Butternuts didn't set as much fruit, as it was just too compact. They didn't have enough open space. So I think I could actually probably bump my productivity if I go with a bush plants and put fewer plants in. I'll probably get more instead of less. Now, sometimes when I put things in the tunnel, what I try to do is I try to put in way too much, because seeing how much productivity I can get. And in this case, it just definitely worked backwards. The reason why we put the squash in the tunnel is we have a severe deer pressure problem. And so this was an experiment to see if I could raise the squash in here and keep the deer out and actually get more produce. As it turns out, I think I made some operating errors that I think if corrected, it will probably work out okay. So anyway, that was the squash experiment. I think I'd say my results are meh, but not so much so that I would say just abandon it and not do it again. I think I'd just try it a little different next time. So anyway, folks, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.